Welcome back to Cultivating Resilience. Today, we're unlocking the secrets of the developing brain and how neuroscience can help us support kids' emotional resilience. The brain is constantly growing, and understanding its development helps us respond to children in ways that nurture emotional well-being. Joella, thank you for being with us here today. Tell me a little bit about what is the developing brain?
So brains, we've all got them. They start developing even in utero. And as babies are born into this world, there are certain parts of their brain that are already really well developed for them. So sometimes we like to talk about the brain in the concept of the hand model of the brain from Dr. Dan Siegel. And he kind of talks about the brain in 3 different parts that are helpful for us in understanding how brain development happens, in what order, those sorts of things. So when we're born, this bottom part of our brain is in charge of all of our living stuff, right? So heartbeat, breathing, all of those things. And that's developed when a baby is born, right? They don't have to think about breathing.
Yeah.
This next middle part of the brain is where the amygdala, or that emotional center of the brain, is. And it's somewhat developed already when a baby is born, but is really, really strong in those early years. A lot of development is happening, which is why we see kids with lots of big feelings when they're really little, right?
Like the terrible twos?
Terrible twos, yes, yeah, exactly. And as we get older, then this top part of the brain is what's called the neocortex, which is in charge of all of the thinking, planning, understanding consequences, cause and effect. And that isn't fully done developing until mid to late 20s, right?
Wow.
But really starts to come online more around age 3-ish, which is why kids start asking, why?
Yeah.
They're that upstairs part of the brain, or the part of the brain that does the thinking, is starting to come online at that point.
Okay, so when you say starting to come online, then is it just there? My 3-year-old can remember to put her jammies on before bed and I don't have to help her?
Yeah.
Or what does that look like over time?
Yes, yeah. So no, unfortunately, right? Yeah. So it takes time for those parts of the brain to develop. So when we think about, even your 3-year-old, maybe they can do 1-step directions, but doing 2-step directions is kind of hard, right? Or understanding that if I dump this water out, it's going to go everywhere, and then I'm going to have to clean it up, right?
Yeah.
So over time, our brains develop and get stronger and build more of those neural pathways, or those connections that lead to things like, I understand what happens next if I do something, or understanding what empathy, so how might you feel about that? Or thinking about all of the different possibilities of, I could be creative, right? All of those things take time to develop and require some intentional nurturance if we want certain parts of the brain and certain of those neural pathways to become really strong.
So you talk about intentional nurturance of those parts of the brain. As a caregiver, what could I do to be intentional to really help my kiddo's brain be the best brain possible?
Yeah.
Is that real? Is that possible?
It is, yeah, yes. So one of the best ways that kids learn is through play. It is so funny to watch children play, and they learn all sorts of lessons. They play what they know, getting the chance to try figuring out, how do I build this? And if I put this extra piece on top, something falls over. Or what is it like when something doesn't go quite as planned, and how do I problem solve around that? So that's one really good way that kids sort of already naturally do in lots of ways, but to have an adult sometimes help facilitate some of that too, help be curious, ask questions, help them problem solve, help them think through different possibilities. That's one really cool way. And then there are also lots of things throughout life that we can use that don't have to be anything special, but to help develop some of those things like problem solving or empathy. So one of my favorite games to play with kids is even if we're watching a TV show together, we stop and pause in the middle and try to make guesses about how might that character feel, or what's coming next, to try to develop those thinking ahead, those planning, those all sorts of things.
Yes. So almost like the would you rather, or those fun things that often parents maybe not think really help cultivate that ability for your brain to be integrated. Why is that important for a brain to be integrated? What's that mean?
So there's lots of different parts of our brain that do different things, right? So they're, in a really simplified way, we can think of there's parts of our brain that are in charge of feeling, and parts of our brain that are in charge of thinking, or parts of our brain that are in charge of this happened and this happened and this happened, right? And we want those parts of the brain to work together for the best functioning. And so when we talk about that concept of integration, it's how do we get the different parts of the brain to work together? Because that's when things work the best, right? It's optimized functioning. And so we might think about, okay, maybe we're going to tell the story of what happened today at school with Johnny, right? And tell me like all of the steps that happened. But let's also think about, how did you feel along each of those? And how did Johnny feel around each of those? So that we can really integrate and bring all of those pieces together.
When I heard you talk about that hand model, it seems like there's parts of my brain that are responsible for more of that emotional piece, and then parts that are more logical. So what I hear you say is when I'm able to integrate those two pieces, it just allows me to maybe navigate situations and future think and problem solve just in a more resilient way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When we can get all of those pieces working together, not only does it help what we see on the external, but it's also really good for even the neurochemicals that are in our brain, that in the body functionings that go along with those, to be integrated as well and to build resilience for kids.
Yeah, you talk about resilience. What's just one thing caregivers could do to cultivate resilience for their kiddos? Because we all want our kids to be resilient.
Yes, one of the best things that I think caregivers can do is just talking with their kids about things that have gone well and things that also have not gone well, and how they've learned from those things, so that when things haven't gone well, or we've had stressors that maybe we didn't show up as our best selves, right? How did you learn from that? How do you grow from that? And what do we do moving forward? How do we make meaning of those experiences that we've had?
Yeah, I'm guessing having those open conversations allow us to learn and grow. And a big part of that resilience I'm hearing you say is just having some of that awareness. And then how do I integrate that awareness to make decisions as I continue to navigate through the world?
Yeah, yep.
Well, the brain is always evolving, and small changes in our approach can have a big impact. Thank you for joining us. Keep supporting your child's emotional growth, one interaction at a time.